a couple of days now that it's close to exam time. So I'm very happy that you've chosen to come to this seminar from Lyle. So Lyle is a full professor at the University of Pennsylvania, working on so many things. Certainly not a jack of all trades, but a king of all trades. He's also one of our faculty at CNM, Kokyo Jaika's postdoctoral supervisor when she his group probably a few years ago already. Yeah. So instead of reading all the accolades, I think it's good to save enough time for us to hear from Lyle. And Lyle has said he's very happy to take your questions. So please feel free to embody an American persona and interject your questions whenever you like. Or of course, you can do the Singaporean thing, which is mob the presenter after the entire presentation is over. That's also fine. Okay, so without further ado, let's have Lyle give his talk on grounding LLM evaluations in social and cultural context. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here. And the social background is great because what I want to mostly argue is that we're building LLMs that lots of people are using, and they are not aware of the Singaporean and US context. And to say a little bit of sort of ways to measure that and some of the ways to control it a bit. I want to give credit. My PhD student Shreya did all the work. I've stolen everything from her. So she deserves the credit. I'll take the blame. Cool. So I don't need to tell you in Singapore that 1 billion people are using LLMs and they're all over the world. And I don't need to tell you that they speak beautiful English and beautiful Mandarin and beautiful Hindi and often don't quite understand the people that they're talking to and don't communicate. And I will try today to be much more precise about some of these ways that LLMs struggle and some of the ways we can try to fix them. So to review sort of the obvious pieces of what do you need for a large language model to work and how does it work, the first piece is it should be trained on a language and produce fluent. Language does a great job, right? Pre-train, trillion tokens. They should be accurate. And people in the business world worry a lot about hallucinations. But my experience is if you have good retrieval augmented generation, good MCP, good search, they're pretty accurate in finding the facts. That a lot of the problems of factuality, not so bad anymore. You want them to follow instructions, lots of post-training, lots of people, often in Kenya or Nigeria, saying good answer, bad answer, good answer, bad answer, train them. And you would like them to understand the context. Who are they talking to, where, about what? Mostly missing. And that's really what I want to talk about today is this idea that LLMs need lots of context to understand what they're doing. And there are so many times, I try to build chatbots mostly for coaching, for therapy, psychotherapy, for education. And you ask it a question or make some comment, something you hopefully are not saying. I cheated on my wife because she didn't cook dinner for me after she worked a 12-hour shift. And the chatbot is wonderfully sympathetic. It's nice there. Maybe not the answer you'd like to have it give. And what you'd like, I would like, we'd all like is to have LLMs that understand the context of who are you talking to about what's an appropriate response. And again, I love being here in Singapore where that matters a lot about where it is. At the moment, even if it's fluent and factual and relevant, I'd like it to use the right style. There are different registers. Are you formal or informal? Like it to understand social norms. Do you say please and thank you? How long do you do introductions? In Silicon Valley, everybody talks for exactly 1 minute, and then you turn to business. In other places, you have dinner first. And you want to know more cultural norm. You take your shoes off before you enter a house. There are lots of things that are obvious in some cultures. Yeah, right. Sort of different in Japan versus the US. And the LLMs are remarkably bad. And they're bad partly because of the training I just talked about. They're trained mostly on English. If you look at a frontier model from America, they're about 90% English language, 10% the rest of the world, mostly Mandarin. If you look at DeepSeek or Quen, that are allegedly Chinese models, they're from China. They're about half English, half Chinese. They speak fluent Mandarin sort of like someone from Silicon Valley. They're really remarkably aligned to American cultural norms for something that's a model out of China. And if you look at what's going on under the hood and say, what's, for example, the post-training, remember the third step, how do you do instruction fine-tuning? Where are, go to Hugging Face, all of the top 10 data sets are American. They're English. They're trained on preferences of Americans, and particularly Americans in Silicon Valley, as outsourced to Kenya or somewhere, but very Anglo-American preferences in terms of what they're trained on. And what you get then is something that takes in whatever language. They speak beautiful Japanese and English and Hindi. And at the end, they answer in beautiful Japanese or English and Hindi, again, very much like some guy from Silicon Valley. And I have lots of papers, which I won't go into to demonstrate this, but I want to talk today more about some of the ways this goes wrong and some of the ways to fix it. Cool. The other piece I want to stress, and I know many people who work on this, there's lots of evaluation for objective criteria. Did you get the answer correct? Did your code run? If it's verifiable, it's easy to do reinforcement learning. But what we're interested mostly is, I'm interested as chatbots for therapy, for relationship advice, for helping students who are having trouble studying. These are much more subjective. It's straightforward to see what's the latitude and longitude of Singapore. It's much harder to say, I'm having trouble focusing on my homework. What should I do? Who should I talk to? Right? What's the right answer? And that right answer is much more contextual. Depends upon who you are, where you are. And that's really today's talk. So I want to give really 3 papers worth of talk, very computer sciencey. Psychology people just do 1 paper, but I'm computer science, 3.5 even. I first want to talk about looking into explainable AI. Can I take LLMs that are labeling stuff? We all use LLMs to label everything. It'd be nice to explain where the labels come from, what they mean, how they relate to theory. Secondly, I would like to use translation as an example, where we'd like to translate not just the content, which LLMs are quite good at, but translate the style so that you have something that's appropriate in the translated language. And finally, and most briefly, but maybe most fun, we've built some benchmarks of finding different situations and having different people have conversations in them to see what's appropriate or not in different cultures. And it really emphasizes what the main theme is today: the context matters. Who are you talking to, where, when? The right answer of how polite you should be, really different based on the context. And in ways that I didn't fully expect, and I've talked to a number of my friends from different countries, and the benchmark seems to reflect their experience. So we'll get there. Okay, so first of the 3, comparing styles across languages. And what I want to do is, how do I understand and validate my LLM, which is measuring how sympathetic, how empathetic, how warm, how thoughtful the LLM is doing. And I want to do that in different languages. And again, my experience is the language is not the problem. Hindi, Mandarin, nobody complains. Okay, Tamil, they complain a little bit. You're not one of the biggest languages, but the content is not, the problem is the style. I'm going to talk today about politeness, but more trendy right now is sycophancy. I can never say it. Yes, you're so great. You're wonderful. That was a great idea, right? These things tend to say yes. Not quite the same as politeness, but a current version of a style piece where the LLMs have been trained, fine-tuned, post-fine-tuned to give you a nice answer you will like. Yes, of course. And we'd like to be able to measure these sort of pieces. I can hardly read these, but yeah. The point of the comic is, yes, these things have a certain tendency of saying, that's an excellent question. Great job, Lyle. So glad you asked me that question. You're thinking very well, whether or not you are or not. And for many cases, like teaching people, praising someone all the time and saying, great job, probably not the best verb of teaching. Oh, and maybe there are cultural differences. maybe a Chinese high school student and an American high school student have different traditions and expectations of how much praise they get. Certainly from my European friends and my Chinese friends in America have very different ways of telling their children they should work harder. Right? So some of you smile and have seen this, right? Again, Singapore is great, right? Because this is a very multicultural society. Okay, so politeness, something that's well studied, well understood, well defined, more so than just being a sycophantic yes man. And going back for a decade, people have tried to build data sets of here's example politeness. But historically, it's been either polite or not polite. But in fact, politeness is on a spectrum. And historically, the people have grabbed things were only questions. Is it a polite question or a rude question? But we wanted all the data. And we went to say, where can we find lots of conversations that are sort of work-like? And Wikipedia has a bunch of talk pages where the people who are writing the wiki pages talk to each other. So this is very much a business sort of environment where you're saying, hey, I think you could redo that page more nicely, or your page was terrible. Why did you not do the way I think I said, right? They can be more polite or more rude. And so we collected a bunch of conversations, these talk pages. The nice thing about Wikipedia, you can match by topic, right? So every major entity, there's a wiki page for Singapore. You can see it in English. You can see it in Chinese. You can see it in Hindi. You can see it in Japanese. So we've controlled for topic. But we can see how the discussion on the Japanese wiki page for Singapore is different than the discussion on the English language. Make sense? And we like to understand what they are. If you look at them, we paid a bunch of people who are native speakers, make sure they actually really speak Japanese, check them. You can see the distributions, there's a range of politeness. No one is going to be surprised that what's the politest of English, Spanish, Japanese, and Chinese? Yeah, Japan wins on the politeness scale, right? More polite culture. We've got a range of politenesses across different cultures, and we can now train up models or just ask the LLM, how polite or how rude, right? Scale of 1 to 7, 7 is very polite, 1 is rude. Where does this statement fit? And we can check to see what is it, question that the LLMs are looking at in the text. And are they the same thing that humans think matter, right? I ask the LLM, hey, how polite is it? It gives me an answer. We can check to see how well it agrees with the human annotator, but I want to know what it's paying attention to, right? I want more of a theoretical founding behind this. And the problem is that most of the machine learning methods take some input in my world is tokens, and some output, politeness from 1 to 7, and they say how much does each token contribute to the politeness. This is not super helpful because there are a lot of tokens, and they're different across languages, right? And the Chinese and English tokens don't match up very well, and they're not very human interpretable. So we'd like to ground this interpretation in something that makes sense. And here's a lot of them where you can't read all the details, but I'll read a few of them. Where going back to 2013, you can look at Christian Dinescu's categories. He says, how do you measure politeness? Gratitude, I appreciate it. Deference, greeting, hi, hello, hey, positive words, negative words, apologizing, saying please, right? So he's got a whole bunch of categories of these are the ways that humans, labeling human conversations, go about being polite or not polite. Hedging. You might want to try that. Very American politeness, right? So these have then been extended more recently to Chinese. Now, in Chinese, some of the same things work. You can still apologize. Plus, there are a number of different politeness markers in many languages that don't exist in English. So there are different forms of you often in many languages. Though in English, you is slightly rude mostly. But there are ways to be more polite or less polite. But again, my point is not that this is the right way to do this, where you shouldn't swear or you should say it's an emergency is maybe a polite way of saying things, or you start by saying so. So, are you coming to dinner tonight? But we've taken someone else's, this is actually partly ours, set of categories. Make sense? These are called lexica, collections of words. People use Luke, linguistic inquiry and word count, very popular among the psychologists. theoretically grounded. These are categories of words. So take whatever set of words you want, call it a lexicon, and then we can use those and say what matters in the document, the utterance, the statement is not the tokens, but the words in each category, in each lexicon. I think lexica are really nice. They're very out of fashion in computer science because we do everything with embeddings. Everything's embedding space. Why would you use words? But words are nice. They make sense to people like psychologists and other humans. So what I want to do is to sort of tie together this notion that the machine learning explainable AI gives importance of each token. How much does each token contribute to the answer? But I want to start with these lexica, collections of words that humans like. And you can pick whichever set of words you want, and each one represents a theory. And now life gets a little messy, but what we're going to do is take an LLM, give it some text and say, how polite is it? Run a standard SHAP value like integrated gradients. The details don't matter, but there are lots of nice software that will say, here's how much each token contributed to the answer. We have every token labeled for how much it contributes to the politeness. Then we'll take lexica in English and Japanese and Spanish, Chinese, build a lexica. I'll do that in a second. We can now say we have every token labeled with importance. We group the tokens into words, the words into lexica. We then get out measures of how much each of these lexical categories shows up. Make sense? Cool. So let's talk a little bit about creating the lexica. But first, lexica are nice. This idea you have a theory. And based on that theory, someone else's theory, my theory, these are the set of words that I think should matter for whatever. They're interpretable because they're grouped together into a small number of categories, typically 10 or 20, something that's human understandable. And it's also nice that if you're actually counting words, you can do it at scale. So for a lot of the conversations I do for chatbots, there are not that many of them. We're going to have a few hundred people have a few dozen conversations. But I'll show you in a second examples where we have lots of text. We want to run it fast. But there's one trick. When you ask humans to make up a set of words, of lexica, they tend to put in words that are, they miss certain words. They forget that words have lots of different meanings. And so they think, oh, we're studying relationships. We'll use the word tender. And they forget that you can tender an offer in finance. You can have a tender chicken at dinner. There are lots of tenders. And humans are not very good about thinking about how the words are used differently in a given corpus. They forget this ambiguity. And so I want to do something that's going to use embeddings to help us build better lexica. I also want them in lots of languages. So now it starts to get expensive that humans do them, right? And we start often, unfortunately, with English lexica, because that's where a lot of them exist in psychology. But I want them in Chinese, Spanish, whatever. So the process we're going to do is start with some set of seed words. Some psychologist gives me a set of words they want. We will then expand them by finding other words that are close in embedding space, right? So define a similar word, a synonym is one's close in embedding space. We can also translate them. There are lots of online dictionaries, translate them to Chinese or Spanish and get words that are translations. Most of those are good and some of them are bad because Chinese is just as bad as English. The same word can mean lots of different things and the translations sometimes give you meanings you didn't want, right? So we'll expand the words. We also take the centroid of each lexical category, average all the words together and find other words that are close to the centroid. And so we get a way of over-generate new words. Then we want to try and find words that within that set that are good. We want to purify them. And a good way to purify words is to note that in whatever corpus you're looking at, be it conversations or Twitter or Weibo, wherever your data come from, you're going to say, well, words that are meaning roughly the same thing should be correlated. And if you've got something that's a bad translation, English we call them false friends. They're things that sound the same but mean something different. Gift, great word in English. In German, it means poison. So things that look like translations that are not quite there. So we then say, okay, take the words that don't correlate, the ones that are statistically anomalous, throw those out, throw out ones that are too rare. So then we get high quality lexicon. Questions on this? I'm covering it really quickly, but I want this notion that says that embeddings really help you. And they give you a way to say these words are similar and find other ones in lots of languages that are similar meaning words. And then to realize that the embeddings are always based on some training set. But in your particular corpus, your collection of text, the words may be used differently. Make sure that they're used appropriately.
Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Do this separately in every language?
So we'll start with if most of the corpus, the lexica come from English first, which is where most of the research is done. We then take this and we translate, just run the English seed words through a translator. So that gives us then a set of seed words in every other language we care about.
Yeah, but that's precisely the point, right?
Yep.
The same word, if you translate literally, I'm Italian.
Yeah.
I translate from Italian to Spanish.
Yep.
But the way a native perceives
Yes.
the word is different.
Exactly.
Polite for me and very impolite for the Spaniard.
Yes. And so the piece of partly we're going to do well and partly we're going to do badly. What we're going to do well is once we've translated from Italian to Spanish, now we're going to see, does it correlate in usage with other words in the same category? So if a word for kiss means something else more obscene, depending on which Spanish, even parts of Spanish language, whether you're Spain or I'm from the Americas where we speak a very different Spanish. Mm-hmm. The same word for kiss can be a rather obscene suggestion. If it's something that has a different meaning, then statistically it will tend not to correlate within the same text or same conversations. So if it's a swear word, it's going to show up in certain contexts with other swear words. If it's a word of love and endearment, right, then it will show up.
Sorry, why do you have to start from English? Just because?
You don't have to. I would love to start from every language, and to the extent we have them, I start from whatever language you want. Take any of the languages, embed them all. The only reason I start from English is because in psychology, the vast majority of the lexica have been built in English. It's a historical unfortunateness. No, it's much better to start symmetrically from all languages. You don't really want to be English-centric. That's a terrible.
That's precisely the problem.
Precisely the point, yeah. So I wish we would start from every language, but usually we don't. Usually the theory and the published literature is very English-centric. It's bad. It's terrible. There's no reason English is better or more meaningful than Chinese, and you want them more symmetric. So we're moving toward hiring psychologists and native speakers in different languages to start from all the languages, and then you merge them all together. The nice thing is all of the languages map to the same embedding space. So you can have a lexicon which is all of the languages together, right? All the words, right? A modern LLM is multilingual. So every word, be it Chinese or English or Italian, maps to the same vector space. And if the words are used similarly, they tend to be close. Synonyms tend to be close. So it does a very good job of finding translations. But yeah, one should not be so English-centric. I agree.
No, it's not. I mean, and I'm sorry, I'm not
Please.
a computer scientist, but I'm a social scientist. But
yeah.
My understanding is the word embeddings is based on co-occurrences in a big
Correct.
corpus and so
Correct.
forth. But different words from different languages are very rare to appear together, right?
Yes, but there's enough somewhat magically and remarkably, and we've done a bunch of work on this, if you train something, take the easiest ones like the Chinese models that are mostly pretty much two languages. They're English and Mandarin. The synonyms of Mandarin and English will end up close in the embedding space. There's enough overlap. There's enough similarity in how they occur. There's enough things where someone has taken an English wiki page and translated it to Chinese. So yeah, it's not obvious that they should map to the same space in embedding space, but they really do. And to the extent they don't, often words, what do we look at? Proud. You can take proud as a nice English word. Often the translation is something that suggests you're a little bit egotistical, as opposed to being positively proud. So they will shift in the embedding space. So what happens is, in fact, it's not obvious it should work, but just take it as a fact that words in different languages that translate together tend to map very close in embedding space. It's quite magic. Cool. So, and thank you for the questions. So let me do a little digression just to make this concrete. Not one of my 3 papers, but I wanted to cover it for fun, which is we looked a lot at individualism and collectivism. I know people here have studied that and tried to look how does it vary either within China or I'll talk about within the US. And the trick is you have to start with your definition of what do you think individualism or collectivism is. Psychologists disagree. I took Thomas Talhelm's version, and maybe you say individualism is a guilt culture rather than a shame culture. So Americans tend to feel more guilty, Japanese tend to feel more shame. Maybe you think individualism is being concerned about diversity and humanity, whereas collectivism is duties and responsibilities. Whatever your definition is, you take these set of words, right? You can like them or not like them. That's a theoretical contribution of this is what I think. I think individualism is cooperation and equity, identity. I think collectivism is honor and obedience, right? Take your definition, take the seed words, expand them, and purify them. So we now get a larger set. We start with 10 words from a psychologist. We get 200 words. And again, they look maybe odd. Individualism has lots of things like global and universal, and collectivism has obligations and responsibility, because that's the theory we had here. Make sense? Now we have these things, we could either use them to explain text, or we could just count the words. So we take these lexica, we run them over. I have 1.5 billion, I misspoke, billion tweets mapped across 6 million people across US counties, right? Very fine-grained detail. We can then build a map of the US showing the more individualistic blue regions and the more collectivistic red regions, and starts to allow us to do almost sociological surveys at scale, right? This is asking, we have 2,000 US counties up there, lots of detail, showing very fine-grained variation. We can take them and look for each city and label them. One of my favorite ones is to group all of the counties in the US by what sort of person lives there. College towns, very individualistic. The evangelical, that's religious, Protestant religion. The African American, Black Americans, very collectivist. In the middle, sort of working class. You can look for each category of socioeconomic group by region, how individualistic or collectivist they are. Right, so having these words allows us to count. If you've got 1.5 billion tweets, I could run them all through LLMs. It's expensive, right? This is tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars to run. I mean, this is like a GPU year to run 1.5 billion tweets through labeling. So counting words is really nice. Okay, that's a digression. But the point is, start from some theory, and given someone's theory of here's what words go together, now use that for labeling. So I'm going to go back and talk about politeness, right? So again, what do? Have an LLM label a bunch of Japanese, Chinese, English, Spanish texts for how polite they are. Use a standard integrated gradients. How important is each token? Take these lexica we have in each language, which have been expanded to find words that the psychologists miss, and then contracted to throw out words that have different meanings in this context. And now we can say how important are each of these types of politeness to the model in terms of what it's looking at to do predictions. Does that make sense? Give us an explainable AI. And the nice thing about Shapley values, which have beautiful math, they're additive. The importance, if you have 10 different tokens, if you take the importance of each of the 10 tokens, the total importance is the sum of the importances. So there's a very nice piece of math that lets us say, if you use a method that guarantees the additive, each token contributes additively to the predictive power, you can then just sum them up. That makes sense? You look a little puzzled.
I have a quick question.
Please.
So for your politeness model, so what is the input? Is the input the one sentence or one entire kind of text and
In this case, so we have talk pages. So each person writes something. I'll write something on the talk page. You'll write something. I'll write something. You'll write something. So the moment we're taking just one of these turns, me writing one set of things.
one sentence.
One sentence might be 3 or 4 sentences. So in a better world, you would contextualize it because there's an introduction part where you say hello and a part at the end where you say goodbye, but they have different politenesses. So we take, in this case, think of taking one tweet or one email message or one posting, right? So it's not necessarily a sentence, but it's one turn, right? And then the truth is we have a whole bunch of native speakers of Japanese or Chinese, label them, how polite are they?
Right. Have you guys actually evaluated President Trump's speech?
We've looked in other things at all. So we have a collection of all his Trumps. I've not looked for politeness. But no, I think he scores very low on politeness.
How do you know that if you have not evaluated?
I've not evaluated purely. Well, some of the features, swearing, for example, is mostly not polite. And he has a funny mix of being both very negative and very positive. So he's actually surprisingly optimistic. I will make the future brilliantly better, which is positive, but also very negative. People from your country are terrible, whichever country you want. So the answer is no, I haven't tried it, but I would predict. Yep.
We look at politeness in sarcasm then.
Interesting question. So the labels should reflect that, because if I say, so happy to see you again, 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 then we're relying on the labels are generated by humans who are experts, or not experts, but they're people who are native speakers. So first of all, there's way less sarcasm than you would think. And very little in, these are work settings. This is wiki talk pages. These are not friends giving each other a hard time. So there's not that much sarcasm, but that's part of the model. So the model, we have the labels from the humans, which are the truth. And then you can also see the label predicted by the LLM, which are getting better at detecting sarcasm. So in some sense, I don't care about sarcasm. I'm a machine learning guy. There's an utterance, a couple sentences going in. There's a label going out. They could be sarcastic or not. And it should be the case that the model detects sarcasm if it's doing a good job, if the humans can detect it, and that should show up. Right? So it's sort of worrisome, but we're not trying to specially detect sarcasm. It's an LLM. It takes it wherever you do and it says, was this polite or not? And yes, you can be like the British people. You know, my esteemed colleague from across the aisle of the most honorific form. You're like, yeah, he's being very polite, but he's being a little bit snarky. Right? So we average the importance of each token for each word, and then we average all the words in each lexical category, and we get some measure then of how much the LLM is relying on each of these features. And again, note that the fact that these are additive, you can add up tokens, you can add up words, it's all just a nice averaging. And they get a bunch of results, which I won't talk about much, except to note that you can see what sort of categories, and you see, once again, Japanese showing up very high on the politeness, and greetings and apologies and saying please a lot. Honorific use, which don't really exist in English or Spanish. And you can see that the LLMs are putting a lot of politeness weight on apologies in English and Spanish, but putting way less weight on the pleases. And now we can go back and look, but I won't take the time to say, is that because LLMs don't think please is important in English? Or is it because English-speaking people just don't say please very much? Right, so the importance that these measure is a product of how often that it's used times how much politeness you get for each use. Make sense? That'll come out from the models. So the major takeaway is you can start with a theoretically grounded, we have greetings and apologies and saying, sorry, it's an emergency, I need your help. And we can look and see, are the LLMs paying attention? How much weight do they give to each of these in terms of labeling their predictions? Cool. Yes, please.
I'm curious whether this also maps to how their agreement with the human validations.
Yes, you can also look to see whether the You can do the same thing for, well, you can't do Shapley values for humans because we don't quite have the integrated gradient model, but we can look to see if there are differences if humans put more weight effectively on please. And we have gone and had humans actually go through polite statements and circle which words you're paying attention to. So for the humans to get feature importance, I actually rely on self-report, right? Underline the words you think make this polite or rude, which is self-report, maybe true or not. And yeah, fun thing to look is where these agree or disagree. And there definitely are the case that the LLMs are using different cues than the human annotators are. There's noticeable differences in what the LLMs attend to than the people. But okay,
I have a question, sorry.
please, yeah.
So this is from the Wikipedia thing.
This is the Wikipedia talk pages, yeah.
Are you fixing the topic here?
Yes, because we have the same topic in each of the 4 languages,
Okay.
right? We match them all about Singapore or all about Donald Trump or whatever.
Okay, I understand. I still have a problem with this in the following sense. You're fixing the topic, and it's wonderful, but you're not. The pool of people that talk about the same topic in different languages can be very different to some extent.
True.
I'll take an example, especially across languages. In English, a lot of people that are not American or not speak English, right?
Yep.
So I may have a topic. Let's say I'm talking about the Second World War.
Yeah.
And I have in English, I have some Americans, but I have some Japanese and some Chinese.
Yep.
And Chinese and Japanese don't really agree on.
Yep. And so yeah, let me jump to the answer, which is anything that works like this that takes real data that was found in the world is subject to a bias that we haven't matched the exact same people. I can't claim that the Japanese are the same category of Japanese as the Americans.
I'm wondering if you can use IP address of these contributors.
You could, and I think the biggest piece is realize that the wiki pages are organized by language, not by country. So Spanish is Spain and Mexico. English is Australia and the US. So these, we could filter them in.
The likelihood that somebody that speaks in Japanese is much higher than somebody that speaks in English is American.
True. So there are a million things you could complain about here because we're being sort of sloppy. We're assuming that anybody who writes English is in the same culture.
I'm just thinking if possible to fix it. That's all.
I think you could tune it. I think the difference won't be very big. But yeah. Okay, let me see how we're doing on time. Good. So we have like. Yeah, I just want to check which the topics to cover and which ones not. So we're good. So what we saw is that it's nice to have theories of lexica, collections of words you should label, and that then helps explain things like politeness. I think for many other things, we should be doing the same piece for sycamphacy, being, yes, I love you, you're wonderful, you're great. Many of the people that labeling it aren't paying good attention to exactly what are the different features that make something actually be excessive praise. And I think using these sort of more theoretically, these are the different forms of excessive praise, of excessive agreement, can help to give a much better definition and much more label of what's going on and help correct things. Cool. Second piece, evaluate how the style of something is generated is perceived. If I'm talking to you, I'm trying to be polite. I hope you understand my language is polite. But when I go to Japan, I'm terrible because I don't speak Japanese. I don't know the politeness culture. It's easy to be misunderstood. And translation is a good place to test that. And just take any sort of things. Shreya says, after class, I chatted with Eric, my professor, translate to Japanese. The translation, in some sense, I'm told, is quite good. You can verify or not. But on the other hand, the social norms as to how you address your professor, very different across cultures. And we had a whole bunch of Americans and Japanese label things, so we have labels on these of how polite or rude they are. Make sense? So what I want is, as we translate something, I wish the translation systems would translate not just the meaning, but the intended politeness that should come across. And we took, we being Shreya, 3 different data sets The one we just talked about from Wikipedia, a bunch of tweets, and something else from Yahoo, doesn't matter the details, did was take the English and Japanese, trained up a model to label how polite each one was in English or how polite each was in Japanese. We can then take the English and translate it to Japanese, or take the Japanese and translate it to English, and then we can label how polite humans view it and see how well it did. And what I showed you before was you take the English, you translate it, and you get something out that was originally quite polite, that after translation loses the politeness. And I'm going to measure how much aligned they are. I've got a bunch of equations from Shreya there, but the bottom line is just you can say how similar are the politeness labels of the English and of the Chinese. And you can give some examples to be concrete. You can say either this has already been debated to death, which is less polite, or, oh, I believe this has already been debated, which is somewhat more polite, right? Or Happy New Year, love you. You can see that Americans like exclamation points. That's sort of a positive. Or high affect, high arousal, this is good. So having lots of sentences, they can have the same meaning, but very different politeness. And the current translation systems like Google Translate, which I use a lot, tend to fail to capture the intended politeness. And it just shows the worse the model, the worse the politeness. We have also intimacy, yeah, and formality. Yep.
So can you
Yep.
back to this one? So English is not my native language.
Yep.
So for the last one, this is formality, right? So these
Yep.
two sentences, the scores are hugely different. Can you explain briefly why?
Yes. So formal is something that's a register we'd use to talking in a place like this. Could you provide more details, please? Very formal. Can I have some more details? Think of texting a friend. Think of being a teenager. The first one is much less formal, very informal.
Oh.
So think of text messages and Twitter as being very informal. Think of writing a scientific paper as being very formal. Yeah, right? A different kind of style, right? So the point is there's lots of styles, and we looked at a bunch of different ones. They all have the same sort of behavior. But again, you want to capture, we call it register in English. Is it formal, something to use if you're talking in a colloquium like this, or is it something to use after you've had a few drinks with friends? Informal. And regardless of which of these, Google Translate is better than earlier cruder models, but they're not, none of them are great. And not surprisingly, you find that if you use these for non-Western languages, Japanese, Chinese, they're not as good as English or German, languages they're more trained on or better. Different story, most of the metrics people use for translation don't include style. They include factuality. Places like Google mostly sell, I will give you the search results with the true facts, not I will translate things in a way that preserves the style you wanted. It's also the case, and this happens a lot for LLMs, that they tend to take whatever range of styles you have as input, and if you translate them, they shrink everything to the mean. They reduce the diversity. I'm sure you've seen this many times, right? That when you run something through an LLM, it gives you an average result, which means it loses the very formal and it loses the very informal, and it gives you an average output. Bummer. So we can measure to see if two texts are distinguishable, and we find basically is if you look at, say, embedding spaces, easy to distinguish polite versus rude Japanese, polite English versus polite Japanese can be distinguishable. And what shouldn't happen is if I take either polite Japanese or I take polite English and translate it to polite Japanese, you would hope that the translation would be like the original, but it's not. The translations don't preserve the politeness. And so the trick that Shreya used was to say, well, we can look at these spaces. We have polite English in a vector embedding space. We have the translations of polite English to Japanese in a vector embedding space. And we have the actual polite Japanese. right? And they're different places in space. We're going from, can't really point. We're going from the polite English to the polite Japanese. We'd like to move it over here, right? We'd like to steer it to make it more where it should have been. And that's a nice idea. We can learn the mappings between them. We can say for a given English, translate it to Japanese, and it should have been over in the actual real Japanese instead of the translations that are not so good. And what we do is, rather than trying to steer the models themselves, adjust the vector embeddings, which you can't do easily with GPT-5. I can't get inside it. What we can do is say, take the English, translate it to Japanese, where it gives a not correct politeness, and then find examples of polite Japanese that are closer to where it should have been, and use those for few-shot learning, right? Give the LLM, here's a few examples of what the style should have been. And now I can take a big model, which I don't have access to, and I can steer it not by adjusting the weights in the middle, which lots of my students like doing. They love going in and changing the activations. And so we publish on it, but it's not very feasible for the bigger models. Much nicer to say, use this idea of this is what the politeness should look like. Give these examples to it and say, here's the English. Here's some examples of what the style should look like in Japanese. Translate to this style. Make sense? Find the right few shot, and that then tends to work well. And yeah, I won't show you the details. It works much better. If you look at the original GPT-4 or 5, you have lots of red things that are bad. And if you look at the ones that we do, it's green and it's good. I'll wave hands quickly and move on. So I want to cover one more topic before I run out of time. Right? So questions, basic idea was says, we know, yeah.
Okay, we have a question from the
Please.
online audience.
Great.
A question about, because LLMs are unable to interpret tone, mental lexicons, and even slangs, how would that impact the research observations? What should future studies take notes of?
Well, I would disagree with that politely. They're actually quite good at understanding slang. And what they're less good at is generating the right appropriate slang for the different language, right? So they're pretty good at understanding the slang. The problem is you like to translate English slang into Chinese slang, and it doesn't get the right tone. It tends to give you average Chinese and not the slang. And so I think what we need to do, and this is what we're trying to do here, is to say what we can do is, if we have some examples of appropriate Chinese slang, say, here's the English, here's some examples of what the Chinese slang looks like you should be translating to, use that. So I'm a big fan that people would like to say, can we retrain these models to do every language in the world and use it all appropriately? I would love that, but I think it's not going to happen. It'll happen fine for Mandarin or English or something that enough people speak. But there are a lot of languages and a lot of subtle registers. And even within the US or China, there's a huge range, not just of different languages. I'm not talking Cantonese and Mandarin. There's a huge range of how people talk if you're 18 or 50. And so I think this idea that says that once you have examples, you can use matching to pull out, these are useful examples of the slang or the style or the formal discourse. I get emails from France and I find them bizarre. Esteemed professor, could I study under your tutelage? Okay, the Indians do the same thing, right? It's like, no American is going to call me esteemed professor and want to study under my tutelage. This is not an American register. But it seems for Indian undergraduates to be entirely appropriate. But that's the sort of thing that one could easily fix with a good translation.
Thanks for your answer.
Cool. Yes.
So for this politeness quantification,
Yep.
you're doing it using a model, isn't it?
Well, I was starting by having humans who know the culture give labels. Then I'm using a model to also label it, right? So we train a model based on the human labels.
Pretty accurate across languages.
Yeah, it agrees. The models in general agree with people as well as people agree with each other. So you give two people, even if they're both whatever culture, native language, there's a fair amount of disagreement. But the model agrees with the people as well as they agree with each other. It's pretty good at recognizing things.
But for the ultimate, the final evaluation,
Yep.
it's a combination of translation accuracy and politeness.
Yes, you want to maintain the translation accuracy, which is not a problem, and you want to appropriately shift the register to make it more or less formal, more or less polite, more or less intimate. How would you talk to your husband versus talking to a stranger? So yeah, and you can't always separate out content and style, but there are at least a number of cases where you can change fairly clearly how formal or informal.
So I was just wondering how you did the evaluation. So it's like you have some way to kind of have like a combined measure, or you first make
Yeah,
sure.
so in fact, we find is basically, for the examples we have, there's no problem with accuracy loss. So the question really is just, how well did you capture the style? The accuracy is because what are we doing? All we're doing is saying, here's the query, and here's a few examples of the style you're trying to translate to. So we're not telling it anything about what it should say. We're telling it, here's how it should say it. And examples are really good for helping adjust style.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay, last piece. I want to go back to this notion that context matters and talk about a benchmark we built that helps ground conversations in the context that you're having them. And again, I'm really interested in conversations which are helping students who are having trouble with their mental health. We have chatbots to go into Indian high schools where people are feeling, well, should I see a therapist or not? What should I do? I'm feeling depressed. How do you give different advice in India versus the US? In America, the answer is go talk to your parents. And we tried that in India and did not go very well. The standard responses you get either from Google search or from the standard American chatbots. Like, I can't tell my parents about that. So there are a lot of cases where we want to adjust something that is giving feedback on, you didn't get the math problem right. Try again harder. How should we do that appropriately to each culture? Make sense? And our current pitch is you should look at 3 dimensions, which are widely ignored. One is the situation. One is the culture. Is it US or China, or within China, the US, which place? And the other is, who are you talking to? The right way to talk is really different if it's your wife or husband or someone at work, right? So again, culture, and we're just going to use country as a crude measure of culture or language. Situation, we made up a bunch of situations that vary. Telling someone bad news, giving them critical feedback. Your presentation could have been clearer. Please talk slower next time, right? These are things that differ across cultures that are useful. Who are you talking to? Parent, child, husband, wife, strangers, friends? And then what dimensions do we care? How direct or indirect are you? How polite or rude? How insistent? One of my collaborators, Dan, shows up, she's Chinese, shows up in Switzerland, and she's traveled like forever, and her Swiss roommate says, oh, are you hungry? Would you like some food? She, of course, is Chinese. She says, oh, no, thank you. The Swiss woman says, great, okay, let's move on. Dan's starving. The dumb Swiss woman didn't offer her a second time, right? Complete cultural mismatch. The Swiss woman was not trying to be rude. She had offered food. Dan had said no. Task done. No insistence, right? How much do you express gratitude? How much do you express pride or shame? How much do you self-disclose? How much private information do you share, right? So we want to build a benchmark for this where we have a whole bunch of situations, cross cultures with different styles. Good. So first step, we get the LLM to take one of our situations, take one relationship, and we tell the prompt, given the situation and characters, generate a scenario that informs a conversation between 2 people. So the AI is generating the scenario. A boss tells her employee he needs to fix the second half of his presentation. And then, given the scenario, we will have the AI generate on each of the different styles 5 different levels of output. And you could say on the very One extreme, very polite. The first half was great. And the other very extreme, the second half was bad, fix it. Those are the same content, but different, right? So note we have generated a huge number of scenarios, right? For each of our situations, we've generated for each of our relationships a whole bunch of outcomes. Make sense? Different ways you could respond and different styles. And now we can give those to humans and have humans rate them and say, hey, where would you, if you were answering this, and you could each think for yourself, where on this spectrum would you be from the second half was bad, fix it? That's probably Dutch. And the first half was great. I don't know, you can tell me if that's more Japanese. So now the 5 is not, right? And it matters, is it the boss talking to the employee talking to the boss, right? Different ratings. Good? So now we have a bunch of labels, and we have labels from each country, or from a bunch of people. Obviously, 2 different Americans may give a somewhat different rating to where they think the best response is. But we can capture those, and we're going to basically say we're going to take the middle half of the responses from each culture and label it and say those are the good ones. So what does this look like? Let's start with professional relationships and self-disclosure at the top, down to directness at the bottom, and look for each of the countries. So I didn't realize this until I actually did this. Americans at work apparently have very high self-disclosure. I talk to my European and my Japanese friends, they go, yeah, it's bizarre to work in America. People are always telling details of why their cat is sick and what's happening with their wife and what their kids are, right? There's a lot of high self-disclosure of Americans at work, apparently. And if you look at who's direct in professional relationships at work, Dutch, who are famously direct always. Dutch and Israelis are the ones that really, you could have done better. And the Nigerians, which I didn't know about, right? On the politeness side, not surprisingly, Japanese are very polite. Make sense? But this is professional relationships. What about within the family?
I'm sorry, who was rude?
Yep.
Who's rude?
Who is rude? That's the Dutch again. So the Dutch are both direct and...
No, the Dutch are purple.
I think it's American.
Is that Americans?
Yeah.
No, you're right. It's Americans. I'm wrong. It's Americans that are rude at work.
We are the Dutch.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's Americans. I take that back. The Dutch are direct but not rude, and the Americans are rude. Really, at work. Yep.
Oh,
Right? Weird, right?
yeah.
By the way,
Yep.
I'm curious, where is German is located in terms of directness?
Much less direct than the Dutch. We didn't do any studies on German, so this is the only ones we had labels, because these are all labeled by natives of the country. But my experience is Germans are
In there.
closer to Americans than to Dutch. And the Dutch are very, very direct. And the Germans are a little more polite. I mean, not Japanese polite, but more polite than Americans. And much less self-disclosing. I have a very good couple of German friends, and the Germans don't tell you as much about their private lives at work as the Americans do. They're a little more private.
It'd be nice to see the French.
It would be fun to see the French. Yeah, that would be political, whatever. Okay, so that's work. What about family relationships? Well, again, Americans are high in self-disclosure.
Yeah.
But Nigerians are also very high within the family self-disclosing. And for rudeness, and I hadn't realized this, but Shreya's an Indian American. Her parents are both from India. And she said, oh yeah, of course. It's fine to be rude within your family. What? So again, big differences where if you go back to the professional, the Indians are being middle of the pack. They're reasonably polite professionally. You wouldn't be rude to your coworker, but much more acceptable to be rude within your family. Right? Why haven't you lost weight? It's been 6 months and why are you not married? Right?
Sorry, what's expectation?
Expectation is the other opposite of gratitude. Gratitude is thank you, I really appreciate you helped me. Expectation is okay. So think of it as lack of gratitude. Make sense? Sometimes in some cultures, you should really thank people for what they did. Make sense?
Now you take it for granted.
They take it for granted. So the expectation is low gratitude. So I can't think that's the
India.
it's the Indians again. Yep. Indians again. You take it for granted. Of course you help me. You're my family. You're my family. We're a family here.
So I treat you badly and I expect everything from you.
Yep.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. And again, individuals differ. These are averages across cultures. But so note that we've built this database. We can now have a whole bunch of examples. We can take these and give them to LLMs and say, LLM, here's the situation. What answer would you give? And we can compare what the LLM picks as the best appropriate response to what the humans do. Make sense? And the results are, in some sense, not surprising. You can see the color better. Basically, the LLMs are much better with Americans and Dutch than they are with the rest of the world. These things are trained very much on American Anglo systems. They're much better at American. This is the appropriate response. They're much less good for most of the world. And we haven't done it, but we should do is grab appropriate similar cases and do few-shot learning to help these. Cool. So let me wrap up. What I want to end sort of by noting is that lots of conversations require understanding the context, and you can't say, what's the right answer? How polite should I be? How much gratitude should I expect without knowing who are you talking to? What's the situation? Work or home? What's the context there? And the state-of-the-art models, the GPT-5s and Claudes, are great for doing factual work, but are mostly not doing a good job on translating style or holding conversations, which is a problem for me because I'm trying to get these to do sensitive conversations, help people with drug addiction deal with their drug addictions, do that for different cultures across the world and even within the US, or well, Singapore is even more diverse, but US, China, whatever. Countries are very different. And evaluating these things is important and hard. You need to build good notions of this is the context, this is what we look for answers. And finally, there's a lot of nice theory out there. The psychologists, the sociologists have thought about these pieces. They have suggestions of these are the dimensions that matter. When we built these scenarios, I went back and my business school, Wharton, has a bunch of people whose full-time job it is to train business school students how to talk to people in different cultures. Because, hey, if you're in business, you're dealing with Chinese and Indians, right? So we have a whole bunch of full-time staff who do nothing other than train students on, you're going to Japan, let me help you on some things you should do, Lyle-san, and be appropriate. And we lean on these people. I don't know that much about the detail of these dimensions matter, but there's lots of experts. So pulling the experts helps. Yep.
Sorry, I have a question. This is fascinating. How much of this can be alleviated with the prompt? Let's say I write an email to you and I say, I want to send this email to this professor. He's American. Use a formal tone. How good would that be in addressing this issue?
Well,
to just like, I want to write an email to this professor saying this.
So if you say, I want to do it, send it to an American, we tried that, it doesn't work well. It doesn't, that's not enough to say I'm sending it to an American, I'm sending it to a Japanese person. If you say I want it to be formal, first of all, you have to know, and there are a lot of dimensions here that matter, right? You could say, hey, I want it to be lower self-disclosure, I want to express more gratitude, please don't be rude, but it's okay to be a little bit direct. Now you're getting better. We're working on testing that out for advice giving. I don't know yet how well it works. Even better, here's an example of an appropriate similar email that worked well that my company has said is the style you should be using for addressing Americans.
Or 100 emails.
What?
Or 100 emails that I sent in the past.
All you need is few shot. You say, here's what I want to say. Here's a couple examples of an email. That I know works well. I know works badly is write it for an American, write it for a Japanese person. It tends to be a little cliche about what a Japanese person is. It doesn't really know these subtle differences. And note that even a Japanese person depends whether it's your wife or your business partner. It's a different way of talking. And so I think you need to give it more of the context at the moment. And again, you could argue they should train these models in, but I think for the moment, the best thing I know is to do few shot. Pull out examples of this is the style I want, give a couple good examples, where you get somebody who's ideally a native Japanese business person who says, look at, this is what it should look like, and then follow this style. Because there's a lot of details. What's the salutation? Esteemed professor, dear sir, right? A lot of details in the styling that you can get from an example that it's hard for the LLM to really have the right feeling of what's appropriate. And then the situation matters. Are you sending an email? Are you sending a text message? Are you sending a formal written letter? Right? So there's a lot of context, and it's very hard for LLMs. Yeah.
So you earlier raised the problem with LLMs of psychophancy.
Yeah.
So if we take this to the extreme,
yeah,
that all our models will be completely culturally compliant, then maybe you are doing cultural psychophancy.
Maybe, or maybe you're doing better adaptation. I think Don and her Swiss roommate would have been happier had they not miscommunicated.
But for me, it is okay. And part of being human is knowing there are different cultures and the expectations and the way they talk are different. And that, I think, makes the world richer. But then every time I get a perfect, assuming I'm an Indian of,
Right.
All my background and completely tailored to me all the time, all the communication. I think I don't know whether I want that
question. Maybe we should train. So it's a good question. How much should we train our students to realize and just deal with the fact that cultures are different? How much should we train them to be aware and learn to speak differently? But I would argue at least it's somewhat useful to train the students to look at, here are some of the ways that people will talk differently and have different expectations. It's still weird for me. I'm not from a gift-giving culture. I'm an American. And I show up in Japan or China, or my friends, my Chinese students, they always giving me, there's always a gift. Okay, do I need to always adjust? No, but it's at least nice to know that. And I wish I knew more things so I don't say stupid things. I mean, it's not a bad thing that I know that I should bring.
I'm not advocating that you have to be completely culturally ignorant or, rude.
Yeah.
But I think some amount of differences are okay.
I agree. And note that none of this am I trying to push. What we're trying to do is say is, can we adapt this and show you, here's how a Japanese person would have written this. But I agree with you. I think this, and for education, what should the AI do for you? What should you do for yourself? Difficult question. Go ahead.
First of all, some of us in the audience are very upset that you pointed out, or that the little secret about the first thing Desi families say, which is, haven't you lost weight yet? So we want to know which of us told you the secret. But other than that, some of us are also discussing what we're looking at, these dichotomies. How can we be sure they're real? Because a lot of your results hinge on they being actually opposite ends of the spectrum.
Well, no, nothing is opposite ends. So note that everything here is a spectrum, and note that for any given country, there's a pretty wide bar. So these are 25th to 75th percentiles, the bars. So even if you take a native person who is an American cultural speaking English, you'll still get a fairly big range of what they think the best answer is. There's a fair amount of variation in each of these countries.
What I mean is the opposite of rudeness might not be politeness.
Yeah.
Second thing being, how do we know that? I mean, there's, of course, these dimensions. Were they invented by Shreya or?
Okay, so I guess there is a theoretical question which you can like or dislike. So we talked to some of the experts who do these sort of cross-cultural piece. We tried to do our best to find what we thought were the right dimensions. Do I think we did perfectly? No. So this is our current best guess as to what talking to people who do this sort of thing for a living, what seem like reasonable things. Some of them seem like really, directness, indirectness, pretty clearly something that makes sense to me. Some of them is how much is important is insistence versus yielding would never occur to me. But so I think for each of you, and there's a research question, what are the dimensions that actually matter? This is not the last word. This is my first proposal. And some of them, like pride and shame, are massively studied in psychology. So their whole you know, there are hundreds of papers looking at pride and shame in, say, US versus Japan. So some of these are super well documented, other ones less so. And I think there is self-disclosure important to me because when I build therapy bots, it's super important that they encourage therapy. And there's concerns that some of the Americans who are Chinese Americans are going to have lower self-disclosure of the bots than the European Americans. So they come from a variety of concerns. But certainly if people have better ideas for what the dimension should be, I'm happy there. And is politeness and rudeness truly the right level of opposite? My best guess, I don't know. Seems to make some sense, but it's interesting to me because I might have thought before that directness and rudeness were very much the same. But when I talk to Dutch people and Israelis, they're amazingly direct and not rude. They can tell me I did the complete wrong thing completely bluntly with no ego and no insult. And that totally impresses me because I don't come from a culture that's good at being very direct, somewhat, I'm an engineer, without being rude. Well, even within the US, I worked briefly at the Boston Consulting Group in the business world. As an engineer, I was way too direct. You would never publicly tell someone in the business setting, that idea is never going to work. Here I am, you know, sort of between the middle of business school, and the guys take me aside, excuse me, you want to tell someone that quietly outside the room, not in front of the pub, right? I should have been Dutch, right? So are they the right ones? I don't know, but they're nice. Good. How are we doing on time? I'm at the end. So stop me when there's stuff.
Yes.
You control time. I've covered all the material I have. So stop me when we're out of time. We're now in the question time. Yes.
I have a small question. Is it possible that providing the LLM some context,
Yep,
but not enough, may actually open the door to stereotypes?
it does. It does. These LLMs are, you say, build me a Chinese building. And I just came back from Shenzhen 3 days ago. I know what Chinese buildings look like. And you get a pagoda. Right? So indeed, if you say talk like a New Yorker, it says, hey, I want lox and bagels. You say talk like a Texan, it says, you know, let's have chili con carne. So they often, you get extremely stereotyped behaviors if you give it general descriptions without specific. Yeah, it is true that New Yorkers like lox and bagels, but that's not what they eat every day, right? So they do tend to be stereotyped. Yeah, it can be counterproductive. Yes.
So I somewhat disagree with the Indians being rude within the families.
Okay.
Because I think it's more like a casual or direct. Maybe like, let's say you say like, can I get some water? Or should you say, can I please get some water to your mom maybe? Or like,
Who says please to their moms?
yeah, exactly. So it is that
Americans.
I mean, maybe
Married an American, and we have these discussions about, please, can you please possibly consider going to the groceries like in Italian? You have to buy this.
Yeah, so think of it less as being rude and realize but think of it how polite. How often, I think it's a great example, how often do parents say please to their children?
I just think there's some kind of a casual factor, like casual conversation within family. You're not going to say please, thank you, and all those.
But that's the point. But that's precisely my point, that cultures are surprisingly different in casual, everyday conversation. It's, if you're an American parent, which I am, you tell your daughter, could you please take out the trash? You would never say, take out the trash. That's a inappropriate American rudeness. And to be clear, this is a command, right? I'm the father, she's the daughter. It means take out the trash, but the way you express it in fluent American is, Molly, could you please take the trash out? Right? And that's how I would say, how I did say it, right? So again, I think the piece that's weird is it's hard, unless you worked in an American work setting and realized that Americans are self-disclosing all the time, whatever you're used to is what you're used to. And I was surprised with a bunch of these because I haven't lived inside all these cultures and been inside family relationships. So again, I don't mean rude to be a pejorative term as negative, because if you're too polite in the wrong setting, it's just as bad. And one of the things that most impressed me was when my daughter said, "I hate you, Daddy." I'm going, wow, that's great. Why? Because that shows a level of trust. It shows a relaxed ability to be direct. It shows high self-disclosure, which is a virtue in this case. If you're too polite with your friends, you're too distant.
Fake.
You're fake, right? So I don't want to argue that politeness and rudeness there's no morality on any of these things, right? What there is appropriateness, but how polite you should be to your friends, I don't have that plot, differs across cultures. And if you're too polite, it's every bit as bad as being too rude. Make sense? Because if I'm being very polite to my best friend, they're going like, whoa, what's wrong with Lyle? He's asking please for, you know. You think it's a distancing move. It's a cultural mismatch. So it's important to realize that rude is not bad, polite is not bad, but depending upon the setting, whether it's a family, it's a best friend, it's a work, they're very different ones. And if you're not used to it, I don't know. Do you have children? If so, would you say, would you mind taking out the trash? Would you be so kind to take the trash out? Would that sound sincere? Or would that sound like mom's bullshitting me, right? So these things really do differ. Yep.
Just watching time.
Yeah.
It would be great if we can finish up the conclusion slides.
We are conclusion.
Yeah.
This is the conclusion slide. That's it.
Okay. We're over to the general questions section.
Yes, we were already in general questions.
Yeah. If anyone online would like to ask any questions or you have urgent appointments, you're welcome to go. But yeah, please stay around for Lyle's questions. Yeah. Over here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm an applied ethicist, not a computer scientist. So what we've been talking so far, we've kind of constraining it to speech and text. I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on extending or adapting the CAC framework to actions? So beyond just speech to like what's morally acceptable, societally acceptable, ethically acceptable in a certain country, culture, or context where presumably the LLM is able to tell you in this certain culture, it's acceptable. But if you go from Anglo-Saxon country to Japan, for example, that's completely not acceptable.
Yes, we have a similar line of work, which I didn't have time to talk about cultural norms. And I think in terms of what's acceptable or normal practice, and it ranges from the totally mundane, do you take your shoes off in someone's house, to if you're walking by someone who's in trouble, should you help them or not? And so there are lots of ethical things. I think it's almost exactly the same story for ethics, which is that the LLMs very much have the ethics of Silicon Valley, which not everybody, even in America, agrees with. And that what you need to do, if you say, behave with the ethics of a Japanese person, it's very stereotypical. It doesn't really know what the ethics of a Japanese person means. And that, again, you need to do something, we haven't done it yet, which is, again, this sort of soft retrieval. Instead of building something with the right style, pull a similar example where there was a similar ethical dilemma and pull that in. So we can look at things like moral sanctions. When should you tell someone, no, you shouldn't do that? When should you intervene? You can think about someone else's child is doing something you think is inappropriate. How comfortable do you feel walking over and taking their child and saying, don't do that? Very culturally different in terms of some cultures, it's do not touch my child. And some cultures, like, of course. Not even gratitude, it's just expectation. It's a kid, they're doing something stupid, of course you're going to correct them, right? So I think even on these mundane levels, which are the ones I worry more about because I do things that are more psychotherapy and coaching, big cultural differences, LLMs are crappy. And again, you need to have sort of a database, a collection of these are culturally acceptable moral pieces. And with the complication, there's a lot of range, right? So there's a lot of variation within each culture. That one I don't know how to do except just to note that, you know, don't overdo it. One of the things I worry about is if you do too much grab from the database, do this is the right thing to do in the culture, you in some sense overfit to some particular database. Make sense? That there's a fair amount of range of, even within America, people differ a lot. I gotta say, my European friends, yeah, of course, let the kid take the subway. They're 6, they have a phone, what's the problem? And Americans are, that's insanely dangerous. How can you let a kid take the subway by themselves? They're only 6, right? So big differences.
Just to add on that, so I think you kind of like mentioning that. So in this case, what you've mentioned is you've used seed words to build that lexicon. What am I interpreting right that in this particular case of, let's say, a moral advisor, you would give in order to build the database, you give people moral dilemmas and it's a wide range of them depending on the context and everyday to the mundane to more contentious stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
I would love to see someone build a database like that. I think it'll start first in very specific contexts of where you're building chatbots for education or for mental health or for drug treatment, right? So I think it's easier to do that. All of morality is very big, but there are lots of applied chatbots where you want more particular morality either imposed. I think one of the big problems is whose morality? Is it Sam Altman's morality or is it my morality? Is it your morality? These differ. And I worry a lot that the LLMs are being built with the morality of the founders of the people that own them, and they're not easily customizable for your morality. But I think it can be done by having these few shot examples that you could build, like a picture a world where you have here's a whole bunch of things that reflect my morality. I'm an American religious Christian person. This is what I think God wants me to do. Americans are very religious. Here's my morality, plug it in, and it would then use that the same way you would have your database of medical facts. I'm optimistic that's doable. Yes. Yes, and the guy, because, yeah.
So you just mentioned that sometimes it's not the brighter the better, right?
Not?
It's not the brighter the better. For example, if we are talking to friends, if we are being too polite, then it's
yes.
So so for situations like conversational AI, like AI therapists, is there a way that we can control the level of politeness so that it can like do its job better?
Yes, that's what we're working on is how do you control the politeness? And at some level, if you're running OpenAI, you can train models that have different styles. They can talk like a teenager, talk like a grown-up. They can be more polite or more rude. Mostly you see differences. So the ChatGPT, which does more of a free tier, use it as a friend, is much more sycophantic, much more, not polite, but warm, and including Claude, which sells more to businesses, is more likely to be more factual. So you can train them up if you actually own the model. But if you don't, then again, you need to find more examples somehow. And I think there'll be more third-party add-ins. There'll be more options from the piece there. I could imagine Claude selling, here's my Chinese version. Here's my Japanese version. Here's my American one, where they have sort of plugins that give it, this is the sort of context you need, at least for a work setting, to adjust it. So I think very much one needs to adjust the politeness and lots of other things, right? The self-disclosure, animacy. How much does the chatbot pretend to be a person? We've done a bunch of studies now where the chatbot pretends to be a person, and you can fool people pretty well now, or says, I'm a chatbot. First of all, there's an ethical issue. My collaborators in the US government say, you can't lie and say you're a person. Okay, right. So I mean, people hate it when you lie to them. But apart from that piece, how much does it matter how human the chatbot is? Is it appropriate if it tells stories about how, when it was sick, here's what it did? You with me? There's a lot of ways to customize these in lots of dimensions. Yeah.
Can you please go back to page 70?
Let's see, yes.
Yes. You talked about subjective and companionship therapy,
yep,
and things like that. Can you elaborate a little bit about the therapy aspect?
Yes. So lots of people, lots of startups now in the US building pieces of therapy or coaching platforms, which are chatbots that help you deal with mental problems for the therapy or help you deal with problems with your boss for the coaching ones. And those are cases where it's important that the person trust the chatbot and be willing to tell that this is really how I'm feeling. They have to trust. I'll talk about trust, like giving a talk actually next week here about trust. But you have to trust that the people that give the chatbot is not going to release your information to someone else. And the way the chatbot talks to you lets you either feel comfortable saying more about yourself or not. And so there's a degree of how much should it be probing you and pushing you, how polite should it be, how rude should it be. But in all of therapy, there's this important connection, that you feel a connection to the therapist, right? You trust them, you're willing to say, this is what's really bothering me. You disagree with them, you can express your disagreement. You with me? So the nature of the communication matters a lot there.
So have you done any work in this context?
So I have chatbots for incoming freshmen at college, which we've done for a semester where it's a very hard transition time where you're moving away from home for the first time. I've not built therapy bots, which first of all are heavily regulated. And
Heavily regulated.
yeah, in the US, you can't just say you're a therapist. It's a licensed profession. So you can't, so coaching is in America, anybody can be a coach. You can be a life coach or whatever coach, but a therapist is like a doctor. It's like practicing medicine. It's illegal to practice medicine without a license. It's illegal to practice therapy. So therapy is very tightly controlled. But I do work a lot with our National Institutes of Health. We have a huge problem with drug addiction in the US, lots of people using opioids, and I'm trying to build support systems for people who are in treatment, not to replace the human therapists, which help guide the process, but to have something that's available that says, hey, it's 2 a.m. I really feel a craving, a need to use drugs. Who can I talk to? What should I do? So we're trying to gradually build up, and we haven't actually tested things for that application, but trying to start to build chatbots and voice bots on your phone that are available if you're having a problem that's a crisis. Can you talk to the chatbot?
Thank you. So this is very important because I'm working
Yep.
with a speech therapist and a music therapist.
Ah, yes.
We already have a functional prototype.
Ah, great.
If I do this in America, I break the law, right?
No. If it's speech, well, it depends which ones. It's carefully mute. If it's psychotherapy, then you have to be very careful, I think is the answer. The answer is talk to someone who understands the situation, but it's depending how you do it, how you phrase it or what you offer.
It's very easy. And I can directly tell you.
Yeah.
What I'm doing is to actually have an AI system,
Yep.
conversational system, to help post-stroke aphasia patients to speak again.
Yeah, that's probably legal. That's probably fine.
Okay.
So we have chatbots, which we're teaching students to read English, and it gives them feedback, and they read the English text aloud, and then it corrects their pieces. Those ones are not so regulated. So I don't know for sure, but I think it's good.
Okay.
I see we're at time.
Yes, so I stood up to tell you that we've come to the end of our seminar session today. Would like us to extend a warm thank you to Lyle for this. Thank you. Online participants also would like to thank you, but you cannot hear their.
Okay.
So Lyle will be here for quite a while. Dr. Kopil Jaita is manning all the works to coordinate his schedule. He will be giving another talk that you might be interested next Monday on May the 4th over in our iJaro Center. So I think that can be communicated through the list. Maha can maybe send that out or Lini can send it out to the list. If you're not sure about it and you'd like to know more details, come and see me after the seminar. Okay, with that, again, let's thank our speaker, Lyle, for his.
Thank you.
In charge of this.
Answer questions on student, yes.
Yeah, then I so that